The scream didn't come from the crash. It came from the woman trapped inside the car, pounding the window with a bleeding hand as traffic streamed past like nothing had happened. No one stopped. Not the pickup that swerved around the wreck, not the sedan that honked in irritation, not the city bus that hissed and pulled away already late. Mary Collins stood frozen at the edge of the crosswalk interview folder crushed against her chest, rainwater dripping from the hood of her coat onto her shoes. The light turned red, then green. Still no one moved toward the car. The engine smoke curled upward thick and gray, mixing with the low morning fog. Somewhere inside the twisted metal, the woman screamed again, hoarse now running out of air. Mary's phone buzzed in her pocket. A reminder. Interview. 9:15 in the morning. Be early, be professional. She looked at the bus disappearing down the block. Looked at the car. Looked at her hands already shaking. Mary had learned the hard way how the world rewarded hesitation. At 40 years old, she cleaned office buildings at night and stocked shelves at dawn when she could get the extra hours. She lived in a one-bedroom walk up on the south edge of Aurora, the kind of place where the heater rattled all winter and the landlord never fixed anything unless a lawyer was involved. She had no savings, no safety net. This interview wasn't ambition, it was survival. The woman in the car coughed, then went silent. Mary moved. She crossed against the light shoes slipping on wet pavement and yanked open the back door. It stuck. The frame had twisted. Mary braced her foot and pulled again, muscles screaming. The door gave way with a shriek of metal. The woman inside was older than Mary, late 50s, maybe face, gray eyes, wide and unfocused. Blood soaked the sleeve of her blazer. Expensive fabric torn and useless now. "I can't breathe," the woman whispered. Mary leaned in her voice low and steady the way her mother used to talk to frightened animals. "You're breathing. Slow. Look at me. Help is coming." It wasn't true yet, but it needed to be. Mary fumbled her phone from her pocket and dialed emergency services. The call connected. Dropped. Connected again. The dispatcher's voice crackled distant and impatient. Location. Cross Street. Injuries. Mary answered all of it, pressing her scarf against the woman's arm, ignoring the rain soaking through her coat. Sirens wailed somewhere far away. Too far. A man stood on the sidewalk a few yards back. Tall, dark coat, no umbrella. He watched without moving, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. His shoes were spotless. His eyes weren't. "Can you help me keep her awake?" Mary called without looking up. The man stepped forward. He knelt beside the car, his movements controlled, deliberate. He spoke to the woman softly, asking her name, her age, grounding her in small details. His voice carried authority, the kind that didn't need to be raised. Mary noticed it even through the adrenaline. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. Long minutes, an eternity. Paramedics flooded the street, pushing traffic back, lifting the woman onto a stretcher. One of them glanced at Mary's hands, slick with blood. "You with her?" Mary shook her head. "No, just someone who stopped." The woman's fingers tightened around Mary's sleeve as they lifted her. "Thank you," she said, barely audible. "Don't leave." Mary didn't answer. She couldn't. When the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens faded, the street exhaled. Cars crept forward again. The moment passed. Just another accident to forget by lunchtime. Mary checked her phone. 9:37. She stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then she laughed once, sharp and broken, and shoved the phone back into her pocket. The man in the dark coat stood beside her now. Up close, he smelled faintly of rain and clean soap. He looked to be in his mid-40s, hair graying at the temples, face lined in a way that spoke more of sleepless nights than age. "You missed something important," he said. "Yes," Mary replied. Her voice surprised her with how steady it sounded. "I did. You didn't hesitate," he said, watching her. "Most people do." Mary shrugged. pulling her coat tighter around herself. Most people weren't raised by someone who worked emergency rooms for 30 years. That earned a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition, maybe? Or respect. He reached into his coat pocket, then stopped as if reconsidering. If you need a witness statement, the police will want— I don't, Mary said. She stepped back, already disengaging. I just need to get cleaned up. She turned toward the bus stop, knowing full well the next bus wouldn't come for another 40 minutes. Knowing, too, that the interview was gone. Another closed door, another quiet mark against her name. Behind her, the man watched her walk away. Rain flattening her hair against her face, shoulders squared like someone used to carrying weight alone. He pulled his phone from his pocket at last and made a call. The connection was instant. I need you to pull every emergency intake from Aurora Memorial this morning, he said. Car accident. Female. Late 50s. And I want the name of the woman who stopped. Yes. Immediately. A pause. His jaw tightened. And clear my calendar, he added. Everything. Mary didn't hear that part. She was already on the bench at the bus stop, blotting blood from her hands with a wad of paper towels she'd found in her bag. The folder with her resume lay soaked at her feet, ink bleeding into nothing. A woman waiting beside her glanced over. You okay, hon? Mary nodded. I will be. She didn't sound convinced, neither did the woman. The bus arrived with a hiss and a sigh, doors opening like a reluctant invitation. Mary stepped on dripping water onto the floor and took a seat near the back. As the bus lurched forward, she looked out the fogged window at the intersection fading behind her. She thought of the interview room she would never see, the polite smiles, the handshake she'd practiced in the mirror, the quiet hope she hadn't let herself name. She also thought of the woman's hand gripping her sleeve, the weight of it, the certainty of that moment. Somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear and the math of rent and groceries, something steadier took hold. Not optimism. Something harder. Something earned. Mary Collins sat upright as the bus rattled on, unaware that a chain had already been set in motion, one that would pull her back into rooms far colder and far more dangerous than any interview where power hid behind civility and judgment came swift. And the man with the dark coat, the one everyone else would soon recognize, was already preparing to step into the fire with her. By the time Mary Collins stepped off the bus, the rain had stopped, but the cold had sharpened, biting through her damp coat as if it had been waiting. The glass doors of Aurora Logistics reflected her back at herself. Wet hair, red hands, a woman who looked like she'd lost an argument with the morning. Inside the lobby hummed with controlled motion, shoes clicking, keycards tapping, voices low and professional. A security desk stood dead center, polished and bright, guarded by a man in his early 60s, with a posture that spoke of military years and a face softened by time. His name badge read Frank Delaney. Mary slowed, unsure why she was even here. The interview was over, she knew that. Still, her feet carried her forward. Frank's eyes lifted. He took her in without staring. Can I help you, ma'am? I had an interview, Mary said. Her voice wavered, then steadied. This morning, 9:15. Frank checked the screen, scrolled once. Mary Collins, yes. He exhaled through his nose, quiet. That wrapped up. I know, Mary said. I just needed to say I was here. Frank studied her hands, still faintly stained, the way she stood like she expected to be pushed back. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're not the first person to miss something important walking in that door. But most folks don't come back. I'm not asking for anything, Mary said quickly. I just didn't want it to look like I didn't care. Frank nodded once. He slid a visitor badge across the desk. Wait over there, he said, gesturing to a row of chairs near the window. 5 minutes. Mary opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She sat, watched the rain streak down the glass, counted her breaths. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Across the lobby, a woman in a navy suit paced with sharp steps, phone pressed to her ear. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation marks. She glanced at Mary, eyes flicking down and back up, dismissive. "That's her!" the woman snapped into the phone. "Late is late. We don't bend standards." Mary looked away. Frank returned, face unreadable. "Someone wants a word." Mary stood. Her legs felt hollow. The elevator ride was silent. The woman from the phone call stood beside her now. Linda Harris, according to the placard by the doors. Head of Human Resources. Early 50s. Perfect hair. Perfect spine. Not a hair out of place. Linda didn't look at Mary until the doors opened. "This is irregular," she said flatly. "Do you understand that? Yes, we value discipline, punctuality, accountability. Yes." Linda paused, surprised by the lack of pushback. "You were late." "I was. You missed your slot." "I know." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Do you always accept consequences so easily?" Mary met her gaze. "Only the ones I earn." The conference room was cold, deliberately so. A long table, bottled water untouched, 2 empty chairs on one side, one on the other. Linda gestured. "Sit." Mary did. "Explain," Linda said. Mary took a breath. The smell of rain still clung to her. There was an accident. A woman was trapped in her car. No one stopped. Linda raised a hand. "This isn't about your personal choices. It's about professional judgment." Mary nodded. "Then my judgment was poor." Silence stretched. "You understand," Linda continued, "that if we excuse this, we open the door to every excuse. I understand." "Then why are you here?" Mary hesitated, just long enough to feel the weight of the room. "Because I don't regret it." Linda leaned back. Her expression hardened. "Regret is irrelevant." A knock interrupted them. Light. Precise. The door opened. A man stepped in. Mary recognized the coat first. Dark. Clean. The same one from the sidewalk. He looked different here. Not taller, not louder. Just centered, like the room had been waiting for him. Linda stood so fast her chair scraped. "Mr. Whitaker." Mary's breath caught shallow and sharp. James Whitaker nodded once. "Sit, Linda." Linda did. Slowly. James turned his attention to Mary. His gaze was steady, not unkind, not gentle either. "Ms. Collins," he said. "We met earlier." Mary swallowed. "Yes." "In the rain." "Yes." "You didn't know who I was." "No." Would it have changed anything? Mary thought of the woman's hand. The blood. The sound of metal tearing. "It would have changed how scared I was," she said honestly. "Not what I did." James studied her like a problem with no obvious solution. "Why come back at all?" "Because I needed to look this building in the eye," Mary said. "And no, I didn't walk away from it." Linda cleared her throat. "With respect, this isn't." James lifted a finger. Linda stopped. "Ms. Collins," he said, "what do you do for a living?" "I clean offices. Night shifts." "How long?" "Long enough to know which lights stay on when no one's watching." Something flickered behind James's eyes. Approval, maybe? Or recognition? He turned to Linda. "Who made the decision to dismiss her?" "I did," Linda said. "According to policy." James nodded. "And policy exists to protect what the company, and who protects the company when policy fails." Linda's jaw tightened. "Policy doesn't fail." James smiled then. Not warmly. It does. Quietly. All the time. He stood. "This meeting is adjourned." Linda looked between them. "What does that mean?" It means James said that Ms. Collins will hear from us in writing. Mary stood as well, uncertain. Thank you for your time. James stopped her at the door. You're not being offered anything today, he said. Understand that. I do. But you will be asked to account for what you did. Mary met his gaze. I already have. Outside, the sky had cleared into something brittle and pale. Mary walked until her feet hurt, until the building was just another shape behind her. She didn't know what she'd won or lost, only that something had shifted. Across town in a quiet hospital room, the woman from the wreck opened her eyes. Machines hummed. A man sat beside her bed. Did they find her? She asked. Yes, James said softly. They did. She smiled weakly. Good. Back in her apartment that night, Mary washed the blood from her coat water running pink, then clear. She hung it to dry and sat on the edge of her bed staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She didn't answer. It buzzed again, then stopped. Across the city, James Whittaker stared at a folder on his desk. Mary Collins. No degree. No references worth mentioning. A gap-filled work history. And one morning, one decision that refused to leave his mind. The real test hadn't begun yet. The letter arrived on Thursday morning, slid under Mary Collins's door like it didn't want to be seen. No logo, no apology, just heavy paper and a return address she recognized immediately. Aurora Logistics. Mary stared at it for a full minute before bending down to pick it up. Her apartment was quiet, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant thud of someone else's television through the wall. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw metal folding in on itself, heard a woman gasp for air. The letter wasn't an offer. It was a request. Please appear for a formal review hearing. Attendance mandatory. Failure to attend will result in permanent removal from consideration. Mary read it twice, then a third time. A review hearing. Not an interview. Not a second chance. Something colder. Something that sounded like judgment dressed up as process. She folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. Made coffee she barely drank. Changed into the cleanest clothes she owned. The coat had dried stiff, still faintly marked where the rain had soaked through. She wore it anyway. At Aurora Logistics, the lobby felt different. Quieter. Less polite. Frank Delaney was at the desk again, but he didn't smile this time. They moved it upstairs, he said, scanning her badge. Executive floor. Mary nodded. Thank you. Frank hesitated. For what it's worth, he added, lowering his voice, people don't usually come back from those rooms the same way they went in. The elevator doors closed with a soft thud. As it rose, Mary felt the pressure in her ears, the same feeling she'd had waiting for the ambulance, that sense of being carried somewhere without control. The executive floor was all glass and silence. A long corridor. Frosted walls. At the far end, a conference room glowed with white light. Inside, 5 people waited. Linda Harris sat at the center, hands folded, expression carved from stone. To her left, a man Mary didn't recognize. Gray-haired, thin smile, legal eyes. To her right, a younger woman tapping notes into a tablet, not looking up. 2 others sat farther back, observers more than participants. James Whittaker was not there. Mary took the seat indicated to her. The chair was lower than the others. She noticed. She said nothing. This is not an interview, Linda began. This is a review of conduct. Mary nodded once. You were late? Linda continued. You failed to notify. You disrupted scheduling. You placed personal judgment above professional obligation. Yes. Linda paused. Do you deny any of that? No. The gray-haired man leaned forward. Then why are we here? Mary met his eyes. Because someone asked me to be. Silence rippled across the table. Linda inhaled. You assisted at the scene of an accident. Yes. without being asked. Yes, without regard for consequence. Mary felt something stir then, not anger, something steadier. I regarded the consequence, she said. I just chose which one I could live with. The younger woman finally looked up, surprised. The man smiled thinly. You're aware that the individual you assisted has significant influence within this organization. I wasn't, Mary said, at the time. But you are now. Yes. And yet you didn't mention it in your statement. Mary shook her head. I wasn't there for him. Linda's voice sharpened. This isn't about morality, this is about boundaries. Boundaries don't bleed, Mary said before she could stop herself. The room went very still. Linda's lips tightened. Careful, I am, Mary replied. Every day. A door opened at the far end of the room. James Whittaker entered without hurry. The room shifted around him, subtle and immediate. Chairs straightened, backs stiffened. Continue, he said calmly. I was listening. Linda stood halfway, then sat again. We were clarifying expectations. James took the seat at the head of the table, folding his hands. He looked at Mary, not unkindly. Ms. Collins, did you know there would be a review? Yes. And you came anyway? Yes. Why Mary didn't answer immediately. She felt every eye on her weighing her. She thought of the woman in the hospital bed, of the sound her own bones made lifting that door. Because if I don't show up when I'm called, she said slowly, then I'm just someone things happen to. James nodded. Once. He turned to the others. Do any of you know what happened after the ambulance left? The gray-haired man frowned. That wasn't in the report. The woman James continued is a regional compliance auditor, formerly with the Department of Transportation. She was on her way to inspect one of our contracted carriers. Linda's face drained of color. She survived, James said, and she remembers exactly who stopped, who didn't, who kept driving. The younger woman's fingers froze over the tablet. James looked back at Mary. She asked for you. Mary blinked. Me? Yes. A knock came at the door. Soft, precise. A nurse stood there hesitant. Mr. Whittaker, she's awake. And she insists. James rose. Excuse us. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and rain-soaked fabric. The woman lay propped against pillows, pale but alert eyes, sharp despite the bruising. There you are, she said when Mary stepped in. I was beginning to think they'd hide you. Mary stood awkwardly. How are you feeling? Angry, the woman said. Which is good. It means I'm alive. She reached for Mary's hand. Her grip was firm. Do you know what happens to people who look the other way? Mary shook her head. They build systems that collapse, the woman said. She looked at James. And they call it policy. James didn't look away. Back in the conference room, Linda stared at the empty chair where James had been. Her breathing had gone shallow. This is highly irregular. The gray-haired man leaned close. This is worse, he whispered. This is exposure. James returned alone 10 minutes later. His face was harder now. Set. This review is concluded, he said. Ms. Collins will not be dismissed. Linda opened her mouth. She will not be hired today either, James continued. She will be placed under provisional assessment. On what authority Linda demanded. Mine. The observers shifted. The younger woman typed furiously. James stood. We will reconvene after the audit. Mary rose, heart pounding. She hadn't won. She hadn't lost. She'd been moved. As she left the room, Linda's voice followed her, low and dangerous. People like you don't belong here. Mary stopped, turned. People like me, she said quietly, keep things from breaking when no one else is looking. She walked out without waiting for an answer. Outside, the sky had darkened again. Another storm coming. Mary didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped into a war that had been waiting for a reason to start. The audit didn't begin with questions. It began with silence. Mary Collins reported to Aurora Logistics the following Monday at 7 in the morning, an hour earlier than instructed because waiting had always felt safer than arriving on time and being judged for it. The executive floor was still dark. Only the cleaning crew moved through the hall's carts, humming softly, the smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. For the first time in years, Mary wasn't one of them. She stood by the security desk, provisional badge clipped to her coat, the word temporary printed in block letters beneath her name. Frank Delaney nodded to her, then glanced down the hallway. "They're watching already," he murmured. "Don't give them anything easy." Mary nodded. She didn't ask who they were. She already knew. The provisional role had no title anyone could agree on. Process observer, operational assistant, temporary compliance aide. None of it came with a desk. Mary was told to sit in on meetings, walk the floor, listen record. Not opinions, not feelings. Facts. Her first stop was the dispatch room, phones ringing, screens blinking with route data, a dozen people moving fast, speaking faster. When Mary entered the room, shifted, shoulders tightened, voices dropped. A man in his 30s, sleeves rolled up, glanced at her badge and scoffed. "What is this? Another consultant?" Mary shook her head. "I'm just here to observe." "That's worse," he muttered. She took a seat against the wall and opened her notebook. The pen felt too light in her hand. She wrote times, words, the way people avoided certain screens, the way a supervisor's jaw clenched when a missed delivery flashed red. At 10:20 in the morning, a driver called in from the interstate. Blown tire, late delivery. The supervisor marked it weather-related without looking up. Mary looked at the weather monitor. Clear skies, no alerts. She wrote that down. By noon, she had 3 pages of notes and a headache. No one offered her water. No one asked her name. That was fine. Invisibility was familiar territory. At 1:15, she was escorted to a glass-walled conference room where Linda Harris waited alone. "You're collecting impressions," Linda said without preamble. "I'm recording observations." Linda smiled thinly. "Careful with the difference." Mary met her gaze. "I am." Linda leaned forward. "Do you know how many people want your seat right now? I don't have a seat." Linda's smile faded. "Exactly." The afternoon was worse. Warehouse floors, loading docks, men with tired eyes and bruised knuckles who looked at Mary like she was trouble wrapped in politeness. One of them, an older driver with a limp, pulled her aside near the break room. "You here to get us fired?" he asked quietly. Mary shook her head. "I'm here to write down what happens." He studied her face. "Then write this. We do what we're told. And when something breaks, it's never the ones upstairs who pay." Mary wrote that down too. By the end of the day, her feet ached, and her notebook was nearly full. She handed her notes to a junior analyst who barely acknowledged her and was told to return the next morning. On Tuesday, the auditors arrived. Not from Aurora, from outside. 3 people in dark suits, no company badges, eyes sharp, and voices measured. They split up immediately. Questions began to ripple through the building like cracks under pressure. Mary wasn't included in their meetings. She wasn't excluded either. She hovered at the edges, listening. Watching Linda's posture stiffen with each passing hour. Watching supervisors scramble to produce documentation that hadn't existed the week before. At 3:40 in the afternoon, an argument broke out near the freight allocation board. A regional manager, red-faced, pointing at a screen. A dispatcher shouting back. The auditors watched without intervening. Mary stood beside James Whitaker near the doorway. He hadn't spoken to her all day, not once. That felt intentional. The manager slammed his hand on the table. "We don't have time for this. Just market compliant." Mary felt it before she thought it. The shift, the line being crossed, she stepped forward. It wasn't compliant yesterday. The room froze. Every head turned. The manager stared at her. Who asked you? No one, Mary said. Her voice didn't shake. She surprised herself with that. But it's in the log. The alteration happened after the fact. Linda appeared in the doorway, eyes flashing. This is inappropriate. James spoke then. Quiet. Precise. Is it inaccurate? No one answered. The auditor nearest the board leaned in, scrolling. She's right, he said. Timestamp doesn't match. The manager's face drained. This is a misunderstanding. Sit down, James said. The words landed heavy. The manager sat. That night, Mary went home to her apartment and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Her phone buzzed twice. Unknown number. She didn't answer. She didn't sleep. By Wednesday, the building felt different. Tense, defensive. People whispered. Doors closed. Mary caught fragments of conversation that stopped when she passed. She was called into another meeting late in the afternoon. Smaller room. No windows. James was there. So was Linda. So was a man Mary hadn't seen before, late 40s, expensive watch eyes that didn't miss much. This is Mark Ellison, James said. Chief Operating Officer. Mark nodded once. You've been busy. Mary said nothing. Mark leaned back. You flagged 3 discrepancies that led to immediate corrective action. I wrote what I saw, and what you saw, Mark said, could cost this company millions. Mary met his gaze. It already has. Silence followed. Linda broke it. This is exactly why provisional roles are dangerous. She doesn't understand context. Mary looked at Linda then. Really looked. The tension in her jaw. The way her hands clenched. Fear. Not of Mary. Of exposure. James spoke again. Context is what we're reviewing. He turned to Mary. Why didn't you come to me first? Mary considered the question. Because you didn't ask me to, she said. You asked me to observe. James held her gaze. And if this costs people their jobs? Mary swallowed. Then maybe those jobs were built on something that shouldn't last. Mark exhaled slowly. You're either very brave or very naive. Mary shook her head. I'm tired of pretending those are different things. The meeting ended without resolution. On Thursday morning, a rumor spread through the warehouse before Mary even arrived. A federal inquiry. Possible penalties. Names being reviewed. By noon, 2 supervisors were escorted out quietly. No announcements, no explanations. Frank Delaney caught Mary near the elevator. You okay? He asked. I think so. He hesitated. You should know. People upstairs are split. Some want you gone. Some think you're a shield. Mary frowned. A shield for what Frank didn't answer. That afternoon, James stopped her outside the conference room where it had all begun. The glass reflected them back, distorted. You didn't ask for any of this, he said. No. And yet you keep stepping into it. Mary looked at her hands. Clean now. Still remembered the blood. I don't step, she said. I stand. James studied her for a long moment. That's what makes this dangerous. For who? For everyone. The audit report was scheduled for release Friday morning. The building held its breath. Mary went home that night knowing something was coming. She just didn't know who it would come for. Outside, the storm broke at last. Rain hammered the city, relentless, washing everything down to what remained underneath. Friday morning didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with an email. Mary Collins read it standing in her kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles ached. Subject line plain. Audit findings and immediate actions. Sent at 6:12 in the morning. She didn't open it yet. Outside, a garbage truck growled past. Someone laughed on a nearby balcony. The city moved like nothing was wrong. Mary breathed once slow and deliberate, then tapped the screen. The message was longer than she expected. Formal language, legal phrasing, findings confirmed, multiple violations, internal accountability measures pending, cooperation with external agencies ongoing. Her name appeared once. Not highlighted, not praised, not condemned. Provisional assignment extended pending final determination. Mary closed the email and sat down at the small kitchen table. She felt no relief, no triumph, only the strange quiet that followed a storm when you realized what had been washed away wouldn't be coming back. By the time she reached Aurora Logistics, the building was already in motion. Security presence doubled. Visitors logged more carefully. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Frank Delaney met her at the desk. His expression was tight, careful. They started early. Who everyone, he said. Legal, compliance, press if they get a whiff. Mary clipped on her badge. Temporary still. Always temporary. Am I supposed to be somewhere? Frank hesitated, then handed her a folded slip of paper. Conference room 7, 8 sharp. Conference room 7 was smaller than the others. No windows. The air felt used. James Whitaker stood near the table jacket, off sleeves rolled to the elbow. Mark Ellison leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Linda Harris sat alone at the far end, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the table in front of her. No one spoke when Mary entered. Sit, James said. Mary sat. James didn't waste time. The audit confirmed what we suspected. And more. Linda's jaw tightened. She didn't look up. 3 departments falsified compliance records, James continued. 2 supervisors knowingly approved unsafe routes. 1 senior manager altered reports after the fact. Mark added, Federal inquiry is moving forward. Linda finally lifted her head. And you think this rests on me? James looked at her. I think you knew enough to stop it. I enforced policy, Linda said sharply. My job was hiring, not field operations. Hiring sets culture, James replied. Culture sets behavior. Mary felt the tension like a wire pulled too tight. She kept her eyes forward. Linda turned to her then. And you, she said, voice low, you walked in here like some kind of moral authority. Mary met her gaze. I walked in here because you called me. You enjoyed this, Linda snapped, watching people fall. No, Mary said. I hated every minute. James raised a hand. Enough. Silence settled. This isn't a trial, James said. It's a reckoning. He turned to Mary. You flagged discrepancies without instruction. You spoke up when it wasn't safe to do so. You also bypassed established channels. Yes. Why? Mary swallowed. Because established channels were the problem. Mark studied her. You realize how exposed that makes us? Mary nodded. I do. And yet you kept going. Yes. James watched her closely. Do you know what happens next? No. You will be blamed, Linda said flatly. By someone. By many. People don't forgive mirrors. Mary felt the truth of that land heavy in her chest. James exhaled. Linda Harris, he said, effective immediately. You are relieved of oversight responsibilities related to hiring and compliance. You will remain with the company pending further review. Linda went still. Very still. You're sidelining me. I'm containing damage, James replied. Linda stood slowly. Her eyes burned. You think this ends with me? I think this begins with accountability." She laughed once. Sharp. Bitter. "And her," she gestured to Mary, "what do you think she is to you? A conscience, a symbol." James didn't look away. "She's a line we crossed too many times." Linda gathered her things with controlled movements and left without another word. The door closed softly behind her. Mark pushed off the wall. "Press statement goes out at noon. We'll emphasize corrective action. Transparency." James nodded. "Do it." Mark left. James turned back to Mary. For the first time that morning, his expression softened. "Just a fraction. This will cost you." Mary nodded. "I know. People will say you overstepped, that you were reckless." "Yes. And some will try to make you disappear." Mary thought of her apartment, her coat, the temporary badge. "I've been disappearing my whole life." James watched her. "That stops now." Mary frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means James said choosing his words that provisional status is no longer appropriate." Mary's heart kicked hard. "You said I said you wouldn't be offered anything today," he replied. "Today has changed." He slid a folder across the table. "Thick, official. Offer of employment," he said. "Operations Integrity Unit. Full benefits. Effective immediately." Mary didn't touch it. "People will say it's because of you." James nodded. "They will. They'll say I'm protected." "Yes. And they'll be right." Mary finally reached for the folder, then stopped. "I don't want protection," she said quietly. "I want responsibility." James studied her, then smiled. Not warmly, proudly. "Good," he said. "Because that's what this is." She opened the folder. The numbers made her breath hitch. Enough for rent, for food, for breathing room she hadn't felt in years. "I didn't plan this," she said. "Any of it." "I know," James replied. "Neither did I." They stood in silence for a moment. Two people surrounded by the aftermath of choices that couldn't be undone. "What happens now?" Mary asked. James looked toward the door. "Now," he said, "we see who stays." The press conference hit at noon. Cameras, statements, apologies measured to the syllable. Mary watched from a small office that had suddenly become hers. She recognized none of the faces on screen. She recognized the language. That afternoon her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered. "This is Susan Hale," a voice said. Familiar. The woman from the wreck. Stronger now. "I hear you've been busy." Mary smiled despite herself. "I hear you're recovering." "I am," Susan said, "and I'm watching." The call ended. As the building emptied that evening, Mary sat alone at her desk. The temporary badge lay in the drawer replaced by a permanent one. Her name printed clean. No qualifiers. Outside, the city glowed under streetlights, unaware of the lines that had shifted. Mary closed her notebook, the same one she'd carried into rooms where no one wanted her voice. She realized something then. The fear hadn't left. It never would. But it no longer controlled the room. Somewhere in the building, a door closed quietly on an old way of doing things, and Mary Collins stayed. The backlash didn't come loudly. It came in glances, silences, and doors that closed a second too fast. By Monday, Mary Collins could feel it the moment she stepped onto the executive floor. Conversations paused when she passed. People smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. Her new badge opened doors, but it didn't open trust. Her office was small glass on two sides, no blinds. Visibility masquerading as transparency. James Whittaker had chosen it deliberately. She knew that. Everyone did. Mary sat at her desk and opened the first report of the day. Route compliance, vendor audits, incident logs, clean on paper, too clean. She had learned to distrust neatness. At 9:10, a calendar invite appeared. Mandatory briefing. Operations Integrity Unit. Conference Room 3. When Mary walked in, 6 people were already seated. Mark Ellison stood at the screen remote in hand. A slide glowed behind him. Revised Oversight Protocols. Let's begin, Mark said. His tone was measured careful. This unit exists to prevent recurrence, not to assign blame. Mary noticed who wasn't there. Linda Harris. Several supervisors recently escorted out. Absences spoke louder than attendance. Mark clicked through slides. New reporting channels. Anonymous escalation. External review triggers. Each point landed like a quiet accusation. A man near the end of the table leaned back, arms crossed. Early 40s. Sales. His name was Greg Nolan. Mary recognized it from the emails that always came with pressure attached. So Greg said, "Cutting in? We're supposed to run everything through this unit now." Mark kept his tone even. "When there's risk," Greg's gaze slid to Mary. "And who decides what counts as risk?" Mary didn't look up from her notes. "The data does." Greg laughed softly. "That's not an answer." Mary met his eyes then. "It's the only one that lasts." The room stilled. Mark cleared his throat and moved on. After the meeting, Mary returned to her office to find an envelope on her desk. No sender. Inside, a single page. A printed screenshot of an old employment record. A night shift janitorial position highlighted in yellow, a handwritten note at the bottom. Know your place. Mary folded the page carefully and slipped it into her drawer. She didn't react, not outwardly, but something tightened behind her ribs. At noon, James stopped by without knocking. He didn't sit. "They're testing you," he said. "I know. They want a reaction. They won't get one." James studied her face. "You don't look surprised." "I've been underestimated my entire life," Mary said. "This is just a different building." He nodded once. "Good. Because it's about to get louder." It did. By midweek, anonymous complaints surfaced. Mary was overreaching. Mary was biased. Mary lacked industry experience. Each accusation vague, each one impossible to disprove. Human Resources reopened an internal review. Different department, different faces, same questions dressed better. Mary answered everything. Calm. Precise. Documented. At home, she slept poorly. Dreams filled with alarms she couldn't silence. With doors that wouldn't open. With the sound of metal tearing. On Thursday evening, as she packed up to leave, Frank Delaney caught her near the elevators. "You should be careful," he said quietly. Mary paused. "About what?" "About becoming the story," Frank replied. "This place eats people who remind it of itself." Mary considered that. "Then it's already hungry." The elevator ride down was crowded. Voices low. Tension thick. When the doors opened in the lobby, a woman stepped in front of Mary. Late 30s, sharp suit, smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mary Collins," the woman said. "I'm Rachel Kim, Internal Communications." Mary nodded. "What can I do for you?" Rachel gestured toward the side corridor. "Quick word." They stopped near the windows. City lights flickered outside. "We're preparing a feature," Rachel said, "about transparency, culture change." Mary felt the trap before it snapped. And your story fits the narrative." Mary held her gaze. "Which part?" "The part where integrity is rewarded." Mary shook her head. "That's not my story." Rachel's smile thinned. "The board would disagree." "I don't," Mary said. "And I won't be used as proof that everything's fixed." Rachel studied her for a long moment. "You're difficult." Mary shrugged. I've been told the article never ran. Friday brought something worse. A compliance breach flagged in one of the regional warehouses. Old contracts, familiar names, Greg Nolan's region. Mary reviewed the files late into the evening. Patterns emerged. Shortcuts, pressure, incentives that rewarded silence. She flagged it, routed it, copied James. Within minutes, her phone rang. You're accusing my team. Greg's voice snapped through the line. I'm documenting risk, Mary replied. You don't understand how this works. I understand exactly how it works, Mary said. That's why it keeps breaking. There was a pause. Then quieter. You're making enemies. Mary closed her eyes. I didn't come here to make friends. The line went dead. That night, as Mary walked to her car, footsteps echoed behind her in the parking garage. She turned. No one there. Just shadows and the hum of fluorescent lights. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Collins, a man's voice said. Older. Calm. This is Thomas Reed, chairman of the board. Mary stopped walking. Yes. We need to talk, he said. Privately. The meeting was set for Monday morning. Off-site. No agenda. Mary didn't tell James. Over the weekend, she replayed everything. The accident, the audit, the way the building shifted around power. She thought of her mother's voice steady in the face of chaos. Do the next right thing. Then the one after that. Monday came too fast. The boardroom overlooked the river. Glass walls. Expensive silence. Thomas Reed sat alone at the table. 70s, silver hair, eyes sharp with experience. Sit, he said. Mary did. You've caused disruption, Thomas said without preamble. Yes, you've cost us money. Yes, you've exposed weaknesses. Yes. Thomas nodded slowly. Good. Mary blinked. You think this company changes because of one audit? He continued. It changes when people decide the old bargains no longer apply. Mary held his gaze. And you think I'm part of that? I think Thomas said you're a test. A test for what? For whether we mean what we say, he replied. Or whether we only say it when it's safe. He leaned forward. They will try to break you, quietly, respectfully, with smiles. Mary felt the weight of his words settle. And if they succeed, she asked. Thomas's mouth curved. Then we will have our answer. The meeting ended without promises. Back at Aurora, James was waiting in her office. You didn't tell me he said. I needed to hear it without armor, Mary replied. He studied her. Are you still in this? Mary looked around the office. The glass, the city beyond, the temporary badge in the drawer she'd never thrown away. Yes, she said, but I'm not here to be brave. Then why Mary met his gaze? Because if I leave, nothing actually changes. James nodded slowly. Then neither do I. As the week closed, the pressure didn't ease. It sharpened. Mary understood something then, standing alone in her office after dark. The story was no longer about whether she belonged. It was about whether the truth could survive inside a system built to bury it. And the system was starting to notice she wasn't going away. The leak broke on a Tuesday night, quiet at first, then everywhere at once. Mary Collins was still at her desk when her phone began to vibrate without stopping. Message after message. Unknown numbers. News alerts lighting up the screen in harsh white blocks of text. Aurora Logistics under federal review. Whistleblower claims systemic misconduct. Internal power struggle erupts at major firm. She didn't open any of them. She already knew. Outside her glass walls, the floor was nearly empty. Cleaning crews again. The low hum of machines. The smell of disinfectant. Full circle, except this time the badge on her chest opened doors instead of closing them. James Whittaker stepped into her office without a word and shut the door behind him. He looked tired in a way that couldn't be hidden by tailored suits or controlled posture. They went to the press, he said. Mary nodded. Yes. You flagged the risk. Yes. And still, yes. James exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. The board is furious. They should be, Mary said. He looked at her sharply, then almost smiled. You really don't know how to soften a blow, do you? No, she replied. I know how to survive one. The first article painted her as a symbol, anonymous insider, moral compass, catalyst for reform. The second was uglier, power-hungry, unqualified, puppet for the CEO, a convenient face for a controlled burn. By morning, her name was everywhere. When Mary walked into the building the next day, conversations didn't just stop, they broke apart. People turned their backs. Phones came out. Whispers followed her down the hall like footsteps she couldn't outrun. Frank Delaney met her at security. He didn't joke this time. You got escorts today. I didn't ask for that. I know, Frank said gently. But someone did. 2 men in suits flanked her as she moved through the lobby. Not guards. Not quite. Something in between. In her office, a stack of printed emails waited on her desk. Threats, warnings, accusations. A few messages of quiet gratitude buried between the noise. Drivers, warehouse staff, people who signed their names and then immediately regretted it. At 10 o'clock, her calendar cleared itself. Mandatory board session, executive floor, immediate attendance required. The boardroom was full when she entered. More faces than she'd ever seen in one place. Power gathered like a storm front. Thomas Reed sat at the center, hands folded. Linda Harris was there too, seated along the wall, no longer central, no longer invisible either. Her expression was tight, unreadable. James stood when Mary entered, not in deference, in acknowledgement. The meeting began without ceremony. This organization is under threat, Thomas said calmly. Not from regulators, from fracture. Eyes turned toward Mary, some openly, some with practiced restraint. The leak, Thomas continued, has exposed internal conflicts that were previously contained. Contained. Mary felt the words settle heavy. A board member leaned forward. We need to identify the source. Mary didn't move. James spoke. The source is irrelevant. The information is accurate. Another voice cut in. Accuracy doesn't absolve damage. Mary finally spoke. Silence doesn't prevent it. Head snapped toward her. Thomas raised a hand. Let her finish. Mary felt the room press in. She thought of the accident. The woman's hand gripping her sleeve. The cost of looking away. You didn't lose control because someone spoke, Mary said. You lost control because too many people stayed quiet for too long. A murmur rippled through the room. Linda stood then, slowly. And what would you know about control, she said, voice tight, after barely surviving your first month here? Mary met her gaze. Enough to recognize fear when it's dressed as professionalism. Linda's laugh was brittle. You think this is courage? It's recklessness. No, Mary said. This is what happens when recklessness runs out of places to hide. The room went silent. Thomas leaned back. We have 2 paths, he said. We can contain this by making an example, or we can confront it by accepting consequences. A board member asked the question everyone was thinking. And what about her? All eyes returned to Mary. James spoke before Thomas could. If you remove her, you prove every allegation true. And if we keep her? Another voice said, we invite chaos. Mary felt her pulse in her ears. She didn't speak. This wasn't her decision. Thomas studied her for a long moment. "Ms. Collins," he said, "do you understand what happens if you stay?" "Yes, you will be isolated. Yes, you will be blamed. Yes, you will be tested." Mary nodded. "I already am." Thomas turned to the board. "Then the question isn't whether she survives this." He looked at James, then Linda, then the others. "It's whether we do." The vote was not unanimous, but it was enough. Mary was not removed. Linda was asked to leave the room. When the door closed behind her, something shifted. Not relief, not victory, just inevitability. By afternoon, the backlash intensified. Stock dipped. Partners called. Lawyers circled. James spent the day in closed rooms making decisions no one would ever thank him for. Mary spent hers answering emails, documenting everything, doing the work no one wanted their name attached to. Late in the day, she found a note taped to her door. Handwritten. "You don't belong here. Quit before you get hurt." She took it down and placed it in the drawer with the others. That evening, as she walked to the parking garage, a man stepped out from between the cars. "Greg Nolan." "You happy now?" he asked quietly. Mary stopped. "This isn't about happy." "You cost me a region," he said. "People lost jobs." "People lost jobs because of decisions you signed off on," Mary replied. "Not because I wrote them down." He stepped closer. "You think truth protects you." "I think it's all I have," she said. He laughed once. "You won't last." Mary met his eyes. "Maybe not, but you won't either." He stared at her, then stepped back, melting into the shadows. At home that night, Mary sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on phone buzzing on the nightstand. She didn't answer any of it. She thought of her mother's voice again. Do the next right thing, even when it costs you, especially then. The next morning, the headlines were harsher, the pressure heavier, the building colder. But Mary Collins walked through the doors anyway, spine straight, eyes forward, knowing the worst part wasn't the noise. It was the moment when it would all go quiet. And she was still standing when it did. The quiet came sooner than Mary expected. It settled over Aurora Logistics on a Thursday morning, thick and unnatural, like a city after a blackout. No alerts, no headlines, no urgent calendar pings, just an eerie calm that felt less like relief and more like a held breath. Mary noticed it the moment she stepped off the elevator. People were at their desks, working, but the edge was gone. No whispers, no side glances. Even the air felt heavier, as if the building itself was waiting. Her phone vibrated once. A single message from James. "Come to my office. Now." James Whitaker stood at the window when she entered. Jacket on tie, loosened city spread beneath him in gray blocks and slow traffic. He didn't turn around right away. "They stopped calling," he said. Mary closed the door behind her. "Who?" "Everyone," James replied. "Reporters, regulators, the board's intermediaries." Mary frowned. "That's not normal." "No," he said quietly. "It's strategic." He finally turned. His expression wasn't tense. It was resolved, which was worse. "They're preparing something," Mary said. "Yes." "For me," she added. "For us," James corrected. "But you're the lever." He walked back to his desk and slid a file toward her. Not an HR folder, not legal. This one was older, thicker, marked internal in faded ink. Mary opened it. Inside were records that didn't belong in the present. Old mergers, quiet settlements, names that appeared, disappeared, then reappeared years later in different divisions. Patterns hidden under restructuring and rebranding. At the center of it all, one constant. Thomas Reed. Mary looked up slowly. This goes back decades. James nodded. Before me. Before Linda. Before most of the board. You knew, Mary said. Not accusing. Observing. I suspected, James replied. I didn't have proof. Not like this. Mary flipped through the pages, her pulse steady, controlled. This is why they didn't remove me. Yes. They needed time. Yes. She closed the folder. They're going to offer me something. James met her gaze. They already have. The meeting request came an hour later. Private session, board chairman's office, no assistants, no legal present. Mary walked alone. Thomas Reed's office was warmer than the others. Wood instead of glass. Books instead of screens. He stood when she entered, smiling like a man greeting a guest, not an adversary. Ms. Collins, he said. Thank you for coming. Mary didn't sit until he did. You've become inconvenient, Thomas began. Mary nodded. That happens when problems stop staying theoretical. Thomas smiled faintly. You're perceptive. He folded his hands. Let me be direct. The company cannot survive another public fracture. Mary waited. You can help prevent that. How? Thomas slid a document across the desk. Severance agreement. Generous. More money than Mary had ever seen attached to a single decision. Non-disclosure clause. Permanent. You leave quietly, Thomas said. You are praised internally. The narrative becomes one of mutual respect and philosophical difference. Mary glanced at the numbers. Enough to pay off her apartment. Enough to disappear comfortably. And the issue, she said, the ones still buried. Thomas's eyes hardened just a fraction, handled internally. Mary looked up. By the same people who buried them. This is how institutions survive, Thomas said calmly. They absorb shocks. They protect the whole. At the cost of individuals, Mary replied. Thomas leaned forward. At the cost of disruption. Mary closed the folder and slid it back. You're asking me to lie. I'm asking you to be pragmatic. No, she said. You're asking me to leave the door open so this can happen again. Thomas studied her. You could do a great deal of good with that money. Mary met his gaze. I already am. Silence stretched. You understand, Thomas said slowly, that if you refuse, the consequences will be severe. Mary nodded. I do. And you still refuse. Yes. Thomas sighed. Then we're done here. Mary stood. No, she said. We're not. She reached into her bag and placed her notebook on his desk. The same battered notebook she'd carried since the dispatch room. She opened it to a page marked with a folded corner. These, she said, tapping the page, are timestamps, communications, decisions that tie directly to you. Thomas's expression didn't change. I copied everything. Mary continued. Off-site, with instructions. Thomas's eyes sharpened. Instructions for what? For release, Mary said. If anything happens to me, or if the company announces my resignation. Silence fell heavier than before. James Whittaker stepped into the room without knocking. I told you she wouldn't bend, he said. Thomas looked between them. For the first time, something like genuine irritation crossed his face. You planned this. James shook his head. No. I just stopped standing in the way. Mary felt a strange calm settle over her. This was the moment. The quiet before the collapse. Thomas leaned back. You realize what this does? Mary nodded. It ends the lie. The fallout began before the day was over. Board members resigned. Lawyers scrambled. The stock dipped hard, then harder. Internal emails flooded the system, no longer cautious, no longer coded. That night, Mary stayed late alone in her office, the city glowing below. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and steady. James joined her near midnight. "It's done," he said. "No," Mary replied. "It started." He smiled then. "Not as a CEO, as a man who had chosen a side." Outside the building finally exhaled. The quiet broke, replaced by the low, constant noise of change. Mary packed her bag and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be worse, louder, harder. But for the first time, she knew exactly where she stood, and so did everyone else. The first subpoena arrived before sunrise. Mary Collins learned about it from a knock on her door, firm, but not aggressive, the sound of authority practiced enough not to alarm the neighbors. She stood barefoot on cold tile robe pulled tight, listening as a man on the other side announced himself Federal Neutral Efficient. When she opened the door, he handed her an envelope and a card. "You're not in trouble," he said, almost kindly. "Not yet." Mary nodded. "I figured." By the time she closed the door, her phone was already vibrating. James. Mark. An unknown number she didn't recognize but somehow knew belonged to a lawyer. The quiet was over. At Aurora Logistics, the building felt stripped of pretense. No smiles, no polite small talk. People moved with purpose now or not at all. Some offices were dark, some names already gone from the directory. Mary walked in without an escort for the first time in weeks. Frank Delaney nodded to her from the desk, eyes tired but steady. "You see the news?" "I did. They're calling it a turning point," Frank said. "They always do." Mary clipped on her badge and headed upstairs. Her office door was open. Inside, 3 bankers' boxes waited on the floor. Legal had cleared them out overnight. Documents she'd flagged, copies of copies. Everything now cataloged, numbered, no longer hers to control. James stood by the window phone pressed to his ear. He hung up when he saw her. "They're moving fast," he said. "Faster than I expected." Mary set her bag down. "That means they're scared." "Yes," James agreed. "And fear makes people careless." The hearings began the following week. They didn't take place in courtrooms at first, but in conference rooms dressed to look neutral. Flags in corners, water pitchers untouched, people speaking carefully as if every word might be replayed later because it would be. Mary testified for hours about routes, about reports, about what she saw and when she saw it. She answered only what was asked. No speeches. No dramatics. When asked why she didn't go through proper channels sooner, she said, "Because those channels were the problem." When asked why she stayed when it became dangerous, she said, "Because leaving wouldn't have made it safer for anyone else." Some of the panelists nodded. Others wrote nothing at all. Outside, the press waited. Microphones. Questions sharpened for sound bites. Mary never stopped walking. One afternoon she found Susan Hale waiting in the lobby. No hospital bracelet now. No bruises visible. She looked stronger, sharper. "You look like someone who hasn't slept," Susan said. Mary smiled faintly. "I haven't." Susan fell into step beside her. "They offered me a deal," she said quietly. Mary stopped. "What kind?" "The kind that comes with conditions." And Susan looked at her. "I declined." Mary studied her face. "Thank you." Susan shrugged. "You saved my life. I figured I owed the truth a little time." The pressure didn't ease. It intensified. An internal email chain leaked, framing Mary as unstable, emotional, driven by personal trauma. It didn't stick, but it stung. People she'd never met debated her motives like she wasn't real. At night, Mary lay awake listening to the city breathe, wondering how much of herself she could afford to lose before the work lost its meaning. James took more calls than he slept. The board fractured publicly. Thomas Reed disappeared from view. His name now followed by phrases like "under investigation" and potential misconduct. One evening, Mark Ellison knocked on Mary's door after most of the floor had emptied. "They're floating a narrative," he said, "that you manipulated me, that you pushed the audit." Mary looked up from her screen. "Did I?" Mark hesitated. "No." "Then let them float it," Mary said. "Gravity works eventually." Mark watched her for a moment. "You ever think about walking away?" "Yes. Why don't you?" Mary closed the file she was reviewing. "Because then this becomes about personalities again, not systems." Mark nodded slowly. "You're not wrong." The first criminal charges were announced on a Wednesday. 2 former executives, 1 current manager. More pending. The stock dipped, then stabilized. Analysts called it resilience. Mary called it memory loss. That Friday, Mary received an envelope at work. No return address. Inside a single photograph, her apartment building, taken from across the street. Her breath caught. Just once. She took the photo to James. He didn't touch it. "We'll handle this." "No," Mary said. "I will." She went to the police, filed a report, documented everything. She refused to be quietly afraid. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in a hotel near the river, watching lights ripple across dark water, thinking about the cost of standing still while everything else moved. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. People started coming to her office, quietly, carefully. Employees she didn't supervise, drivers, analysts, assistants. They closed the door and told her what they'd seen, what they'd been asked to ignore. Mary listened, took notes, promised nothing she couldn't keep. The system cracked wider. At a late hearing, a senator asked her directly, "Do you consider yourself a whistleblower?" Mary thought about it. "No," she said. "I consider myself a witness." The room stilled. That answer followed her everywhere. On the night before Thomas Reed was formally charged, Mary stood alone in her office packing files into a box she didn't know if she'd need. James appeared in the doorway looking older than she'd ever seen him. "It's almost over," he said. Mary shook her head. "It's almost public." James smiled faintly. "Fair." He hesitated. "You know they'll come for you next, in different ways." "I know, and you're still here." Mary looked around the office. The glass, the city beyond, the faint reflection of herself in the dark. "Yes," she said. "I am." Outside, sirens cut through the night, distant but insistent. The machine was finally turning on itself. Mary Collins sat back down at her desk. Steady hands, clear eyes, knowing the final cost hadn't been named yet. But whatever it was, she was done pretending she didn't belong in the room where it would be decided. The verdict did not arrive with applause or outrage. It arrived on a gray afternoon folded into a legal brief, delivered quietly, as if even the law understood the weight of what it carried. Mary Collins read it alone in her office, the same glass-walled room that had once made her feel exposed and now felt simply honest. Guilty pleas entered. Charges upheld. Additional investigations authorized. The language was precise, restrained, final. Thomas Reed's name appeared 3 times. No titles, no honorifics. Just facts. Mary closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Her hands trembled for the first time in weeks, not from fear, from release. Outside her office, the building moved differently now, not cautiously, not defensively, just deliberately. People walked with purpose instead of performance. Conversations didn't stop when she passed. Some nodded, some didn't. Either way, no one pretended she wasn't there. James Whitaker stood in the doorway without knocking as he had so many times before. He didn't speak at first. He simply held up the document she'd already read. "It's done," he said. Mary nodded. "That part is." James stepped inside and closed the door. For once, he didn't look like a man carrying the weight of an entire institution. He looked like someone who had set something down. "They'll write books about this," he said. "Case studies, panels, think pieces." Mary smiled faintly. "They always do. They'll get parts of it wrong. They usually do." James studied her. "You know you don't owe this place anything anymore." Mary looked around the office, the desk by the window. The city stretched out below, imperfect and alive. "I never thought I did," she said. "I just couldn't leave it worse than I found it." That afternoon, the board announced structural reforms, independent oversight, transparent reporting, external accountability built into the system instead of bolted on afterward. Words on paper, yes, but words that now had teeth. Mary was offered a promotion she didn't immediately accept, a title that came with authority she didn't crave, and visibility she had learned to respect but not chase. "I'll stay where I am," she told James. "For now." He nodded, unsurprised. "That's exactly where you're most dangerous." The press cycle burned itself out within days. New scandals replaced old ones. The world moved on as it always did. But inside Aurora Logistics, something held. A week later, Mary walked through the warehouse floor where it had all nearly unraveled. The older driver with the limp spotted her and lifted a hand in greeting. A dispatcher caught her eye and gave a small nod. No gratitude speeches, no declarations, just acknowledgement. That was enough. At home, Mary packed away the old notebook, its pages worn thin from being opened in rooms that didn't want the truth. She didn't throw it out. She placed it on a shelf within reach, not because she needed it, but because she respected what it had cost. Susan Hale called that evening. Her voice was stronger now. Clear. "They sentenced him today," Susan said. "I saw. I'm moving on," Susan continued. "New job, new city." Mary smiled. "Good." There was a pause. "You ever regret stopping that morning?" Mary looked out her window at the street below, at the cars passing without noticing the quiet spaces between them. "No," she said. "I regret how close I came to not stopping." When the call ended, Mary sat in the quiet and let herself feel it all at once. The fear, the exhaustion, the strange gratitude for having been tested in a way that left her intact. Months passed. The company steadied. New faces replaced old ones. Some lessons stuck. Some had to be relearned. Mary knew better than to believe in permanent victories. What did change was smaller, harder to measure. People spoke sooner, documented better, asked different questions. Not because they were brave, but because they had seen what silence cost. One evening, as Mary left the building, Frank Delaney called out from the security desk. "You heading home early?" Mary checked her watch. "For once." Frank smiled. "I told you some doors only close to see what you do next." Mary nodded. "You did." Outside, the city was washed in evening light, ordinary and astonishing all at once. Somewhere a woman was deciding whether to stop. Somewhere else someone was choosing to look away. Mary Collins walked to her car, knowing she couldn't reach them all, knowing she didn't have to. She had learned something the hard way. Integrity wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with certainty or applause. It showed up quietly in moments when no one promised you a reward. And sometimes, if you held your ground long enough, it changed the room. If this story meant something to you like it did to her, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with these 3 words: "Stay human always."